welcome everybody to our online panel. It is going to be about strategic considerations for recruiting in Israel. And this is initiated by Compete, which is a real-time compensation and benefits benchmarking platform for tech. My name is Natalie Ledbetter. I am currently head of people at boldstart Ventures, but I have been an operator and people operations exec in 3 different hypergrowth companies. And so I am intimately, probably too intimately, familiar with the interworkings of building companies from the ground up. So while I've now moved into VC as part of my role, I advise founders to think strategically about compensation plans before they go out and start hiring. And so when I met the team at Compete, it was an absolute no-brainer for me, being a beta tester, and then now we are actually one of their customers. So I'm really excited to be moderating this discussion and hopefully sharing some of the benefits that, again, that building your R&D team in Israel can bring. So we have 3 fantastic speakers today. I'm all experts in their fields. And I am going to go ahead and I'll have them introduce themselves and tell you all a little bit about them. So why don't we go with Gilles first, and then we'll do Leah and on.
So hi, my name is Gilles Gade. I'm a founder and CEO of Cross River Bank. We are an infrastructure bank that caters to the fintech ecosystem. We service predominantly the U.S. market. We have about 1,000 employees total. We have about 850 employees in the US, 150 in Israel. In Israel, it's mostly tech development and data science. And some of our clients are some of the large fintech companies such as Coinbase, Affirm, Upstart, Upgrade, Stripe, and many others. We have about 80 clients. We recently raised some capital in the U.S. market with folks like Eldridge, Andreessen Horowitz, Hanako, T. Rowe Price, and a few others, particularly from the Middle East, altogether raising about $620 million. And we're very happy to be here.
Awesome. All right, Leah.
Wonderful. Thank you. It's great to be here. Appreciate the opportunity to present. I am Leah Cowperthwaite. I'm the manager of the Growth Partners team at Globalization Partners. We're a global employer of record, and we provide a compliant platform that allows companies to hire international teams without first having to set up the infrastructure in country. So a pleasure to be here today and join the panel. We're looking forward to a great discussion. Thank you.
All right, on.
Thanks, Natalie. So I'm On, co-founder and CEO of Wilco. We're kind of like a flight simulator, but for software developers, an environment where people can practice and gain experience in a safe way at their own pace. We've raised about a single % of what Cross River has, but we're very proud of each and every dollar. Before starting Wilco and a short stint as a VC, I was VP engineering at Handy and then at WeWork. And I always say that VP engineering is actually an HR role, not an engineering role.
I love that. That is so good. And also welcome to people operations. Okay, so I'm going to start with Gilles. So it's no secret, I think, to anyone that the U.S. is really struggling. We're facing inflation, unaffordable housing. We've got this supply chain issue. We've had multiple interest rate hikes, and now apparently we have an impending recession. So the impact on business has been basically slowing down hiring, and in some companies they're actually pausing hiring altogether. So less money being spent on marketing, less money being spent on sales, And we're also seeing reductions in force in a lot of these companies that I think all of us understand are well-funded organizations. But at the same time, we are seeing employees ask for raises. So some of them being quite significant. So how do small and medium startups not only survive, but also thrive in this market storm?
So that's that has been the conundrum for most of the startups for the greater part of the past decade. We're faced with extremely stiff competition between established corporations that are growing very nicely in the marketplace, such as Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, and many others into it, and the startup environment. So I think it is key to sell a mission, and it is key to engender passion in people, because that's the only thing that we can compete on. If we could convince the employee that they will have a role in this ecosystem at, let's say, Cross River or any of the firms that are here on this panel, or for the startup environment altogether, if we could sell that mission and sell that passion and make them believe that they will change the world through us, then we have a fighting chance of recruiting some key talent. But outside of that, it's really hard to compete. I can't disagree with you on that point. The tensions, the pressures of heightened inflation. So people are saying they're doubling down on, I want to stay home to work because I can't afford to take my car to work, because gas prices have tripled over the past 6 months. So these are all valid reasons now. I mean, up until now was the pandemic. That waned down and people had a good reason to come back to work because face-to-face is definitely more efficient. But now they have a very valid reason to stay at home and say, sorry, buddy, but either you pay me, 10, 20, 30% increase right now, or I just can't afford to come to work. So what we're faced with those kind of challenges. So we have to double down on selling that passion, selling that vision, making sure everybody embraces it. And hope for the better. And that's what retains employees usually.
I love that. Finally, someone who aligns with people operations and the way that we think about keeping people happy in our organizations. We know that when you're building a company, about 90 to 91% of early tech companies spend is on headcount. It's on people. Of which I think there's no secret that engineering, it makes up a pretty large amount of that spend. So now that everyone is going global, what are some of the factors that come into play when you're doing things like org planning, just to ensure that you're being efficient and cost effective? Particularly when you're looking for new locations to hire and build teams?
Yeah, so first of all, being cost effective is super important, and many people kind of wrongly assume that the right way to be cost efficient is to pay cheaply. I can find a lot of really bad developers for a really low price, but that's not being cost effective. So I think that if you go internationally and looking to expand from just one site, you need to think about the structure, the team structure, the communications between them. And, are you looking for individual developers who are able to take one-off tasks? Are you looking for a team that's able to take on bigger projects? Are you looking to have product managers as part of that team to make it more independent and empower it to take more decisions? Or are you just looking for, working hands, or a term that I don't like, but is sometimes used in the industry, code monkeys? So that also kind of dictates the type of geography you want to go after and the type of talent you're trying to attract, not to mention considerations such as specific domains. So Gilles talked about fintech, which is probably overrepresented in Israel, and you can find a lot of really good fintech talent here. But then if you're looking for other types of tech, they might be better represented in other countries. So knowing your market and playing to its strengths, I think, is super important. And that's the work you have to do before you even decide where on the map you want to put your pin.
I think that makes a ton of sense. And actually, just to follow up on that, Gilles, when so we know that many tech companies are outsourcing various departments overseas. Again, kind of back to what An was saying, in order to reduce expenses. So on the spectrum of like low cost versus high quality, many companies are choosing Israel to deliver the win-win, particularly on R&D, so engineering, product, security, those kinds of things. That said, Israel's definitely not the most cost-effective choice. So why is Israel such a great option for tech companies who are looking to build those technical teams?
So a couple of things. Where number one, you could see from the war in the Ukraine that what was believed to be a very stable economy was in shambles overnight. So we have to be extremely careful to compromise stability of the development team outsourced in a country that could be perceived as stable and then suddenly is becoming extremely unstable at the potential cost of losing the entire development capacity. And a lot of our core companies, like for example, I'm part of a CEO chat with co-CEOs of Andreessen Horowitz, and at least 20 of those had outsourced technology in the Ukraine. They were scrambling, and they had to put basically a full stop to their development operations for a good 3 to 4 weeks until they could turn around. That could be extremely disruptive, particularly when you are monitoring transactions on a daily basis and you need things to continue flowing seamlessly with full redundancy. Then suddenly using your potentially you may lose your customer base. So that's number one. I would be prepared to pay a premium for that to find stability. Number two, I'm not a big fan of outsourcing. I'd rather set up shop in a country and control our fate. There's also a little bit of a passionate play here in being in Israel. Because of the culture of our organization. So there's also that comes into play. And for Indian nationals to be in India, that could be also a passion play for them. So being in a country where you have affinity and you understand the culture and you can communicate better. So I think there's also a premium to pay for that. And then number three, the talent pool is unlimited. There is a startup nation concept. Everybody goes through the army. A lot of those folks are going through the intelligence and the computer literacy. It is probably one of the highest in the world. So I don't mind paying a premium for that as well. So there are a number of reasons why cost doesn't necessarily come into play. And that cost could be 20, 30, 40% more. But at the end of the day, if you do have margins and if your product and services are in high demand, then why not pay for the premium so that you can actually deliver something that is stable in a stable environment with a pool of talent that is unlimited and untapped for the greater part. So that has been our philosophy from day one.
I think that makes so much sense. And I guess just as like a backup question there, are there any things that kind of stick out in your mind as far as things that founders should be considering when they're hiring in Israel, and like any key factors that kind of come to mind that that a company should take into account when they're going to Israel to either open an entity or even use a service like Globalization Partners where Leah's at? In order to, again, build an organization pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, that's a must. I think you do need somebody to hold your hand through the entire process. I think this is key. I I mean, obviously, it doesn't come easy to get a talent pool in Israel, particularly because you're also competing with a lot of the folks, like I mentioned before, like Amazon, Facebook, and so on and so forth. The key here is not to confuse a melting pot and a culture mix. And people have a tendency to try to say, okay, this is our culture. Now you're coming in and you have to espouse our culture, period, stop. We don't believe in that either, particularly when it comes to Israel. There's so much diversity and everybody wants to have their own personality. So it's just to try to adapt to the personality. So find a common denominator of all these personalities as opposed to trying to mesh them into one. That's not going to work. The Middle East is radically different than the Western civilization. And if we don't understand that, we're just, position ourselves to failure. So it's critical to the vast, the vast horizon of diversity that exists in Israel, from the broad spectrum, from level religiosity to the different breed of religiosity and faith. So we have to adapt to every single one of them and not trying to mesh them into one team. That is critical. That means find a common denominator and then let them be independent, but respect every single one of those aspirations.
Got it. I love that. And that's definitely, we have a couple of questions around those cultural nuances that I think are really, really important, particularly for US and European teams, again, going to build R&D teams in Israel. So Leah, I know that you have obviously an extensive background in helping your clients expand their businesses by starting to open shops and employing teams around the world. So I guess I'm very interested in understanding, and part of this is also because I advise a lot of our founders on these things as well, because we know, particularly in growing startups, that velocity can be the make or break. Would you mind sharing with us like some of the questions, common needs, and or challenges even that some of these companies are facing when they move their entities abroad or move their companies abroad?
Absolutely. It's an exciting challenge, but it's a little scary too. If you've never done it in business in another country, you don't know what you don't know. And that's kind of overwhelming sometimes. But in terms of questions that our customers ask, concerns, there's really three that are top of mind. And the first is understanding the employer of record model, right? It's a nascent industry. It's only been around for about 10 years. And before that, the option was set up our own entity in country, hire the full-time employees ourselves, do it yourself. And the other option was bring them on as a contractor. You can get them moving quickly, you can get them assigned to projects and get the work going. And now employer of record sits in between in this unique and exciting way because you get the compliance as if you're doing it yourself and you get the speed as if you're working with the contractor. And it's a full-time employee, it's your employees in country. And so I think really HR managers, hiring specialists, they need to understand, is the employer of record model right for the initiative that they're taking in that country? Is it going to grow with them? Is it going to scale with them? Are they going to have the resources that are required in order to be successful there? So that's understanding the model is really the first biggest challenge. The second is speed to market. Okay, we decided we're going to hire a team. Now, where are they? They should have been here 2 quarters ago, right? We've all heard that. And I think one of the biggest thing is understanding the local market, how your compensation strategy is, what your benefit strategy is, and getting contracts out quickly to find the best talent and secure them. And then the third piece of it is really, what is the experience of the employee on the ground going to be like? Headquarters is thousands of miles away, right? Who are they going to call when they have questions? Are they going to be able to be embraced by our company culture? You know, is there a whistleblower hotline? All of these questions that are specific to the employment regulations of that country. You know, familiarize yourself with as much as you can, and then work with a specialist that understands that market and what the employee's expectations are. Because Jill said it perfectly, like, this is people work, right? You can do it quickly, but you want to make sure you get it right, because if you disrupt the trust that it takes during the onboarding process to secure and, really confirm that it's going to be a successful engagement for both parties, then you may be undermining the initiative completely, right? If you don't get the right people and they don't trust you from the get-go, then your initiative may be not as successful. So I would say making sure that they understand the employer of record model and how it's going to fit their goals, making sure they can move quickly, and then also covering the employee's experience on the ground to ensure the success of the initiative.
And I'll just say I can double click on that because we have a number of portfolio companies that we have recommended going to Globalization Partners. And I think everybody has been incredibly impressed with the service that they have received end to end. So Gilles, when one of the things I'd love to think about is how to set up a structure wise, org wise, an R&D team. And so I guess, what are some of the things that you look for from a quality perspective when you're hiring your tech teams, and what is a typical persona of a person? And obviously that could range from product to data scientists, etc. But what are those personalities? What are those qualities that you look for, and what do those personas look like?
So that's pretty universal. we don't like big egos. So because there's a book that came out a couple of years ago called "The Ego is the Enemy." So they probably do a far better job than I would ever to express that and to explain it. But we try to identify folks that have a tendency to think that they're better than the core, or better than everybody else. We just want a level set. We want a level playing field. We want people to work as a family, and because better than a team, because a team, everybody is dispensable. If somebody doesn't perform, you can actually replace them. You replace the quarterback, or you play, the main player on the soccer team if he doesn't perform. In a family, you can help, but you have but compose with every single member of the family. So you have to get along. If we picked that individual, it's on us to make sure that they fit the core, that they mesh well. So that's on us. That's our responsibility. And if we make a mistake, we have to own that mistake. So I think that has paid off as a strategy, because people feel a lot more loyal and secure in their job, so they can focus on personal growth at the same time as corporate growth. And that's also important. So we look for people who want to grow, people who want a career, another job, people who do not have ego. So leave your bad habits at home. Or if you do have bad habits, we'll try to break those. But overall, we're looking for talent more than skills. That means that we're prepared to go really down the food chain and go to universities, colleges, or even boot camps to recruit. Because if once we identify talent, I think skill is something that you could acquire, particularly on the development side. If you have strong mentors and strong development leads, you could definitely do wonders with folks that are coming out of the woodwork. So that has been our philosophy. It has paid off so far. As we continue to grow, I'm not 100% sure that's going to continue to pay off, but we may have to change our strategy, which we did, by the way. We just recently hired a chief product officer as well as a chief development officer for the country, for Israel. So they will lead the way and restructure the organization a little bit in order to position ourselves for growth and success. So you have to be open to change. That is key. That is critical. Don't be stubborn. Don't double down on your trade. Don't hesitate to cut your losses and move on if things don't work out. In terms of structure, I'm talking about. And then you change the structure, you reinvent things, be a listening ear to your staff, because they have a very strong pulse on what's going on, and they will tell you if you're doing something wrong on the management side. So that, I know that's a lot, but that's pretty much a data dump on the way that we're thinking about this.
No, I think that actually dovetails really nicely into a question that I have for which is there are tons of different remote recruitment strategies, from hiring individuals to building or acquiring entire teams. So I guess what are some of the considerations that you take into account when devising your strategy? And I guess thinking about it, since we're all in tech, in a build versus buy sort of philosophy, what else should companies who are thinking about bringing their employees or starting an office in Israel think about prior to creating, again, a technical hub?
So I think that build versus buy is a great framework to look at this. But before we even delve into that, let's start with the fact that it's very naive to think that you can go into a new geography, whether it's Israel or anywhere else, and assume you'll get the best talent when you're competing with everyone else. And we're especially in a small market like Israel, where everyone knows each other. And then you're coming in and you're saying, oh, I want to hire the best people here. So you have, I think, two main approaches. One is to say, all right, here's a team that is performing well together, and we're able to offer them something as a team, so that we can get them all together. And that's more of the buy approach, right? So you're taking on a team. Hopefully there's some strategic alignment with what you're doing, but even if there isn't one, that's still part of the buy approach. And you're taking on a team, which means that they know how to work together. They can start pretty easily from day one. On the other hand, you might have cultural clashes if the culture at the company you're buying doesn't fit well with yours. That's a concern. And another approach would be to say, we can't necessarily hire the best talent here. So what we want to do is find an anchor, find a person who we think is this type of talent magnet, and then entrust that person with bringing in additional people. And you really want someone who's done that before and has showed that they can do it again. So I would say these are the two main models when you go into a certain geography. Buy, like I said, would be easier, but has the risk of a cultural clash. And build requires you to find that person who's sort of a unicorn, to be honest. It does, I've seen it work, right? But it is hard to find that person. And after you find that person, you have to realize that it's going to take months just to get the core team, and especially if you want to get dozens or hundreds of people, it's going to take a long while.
I love that, because I think you hit on one of the things that a lot of companies who acquire other companies face, which is, again, kind of meshing these very disparate cultures and ensuring that it's not going to make a negative impact on the entire culture, versus, frankly, if you're out there recruiting, unless you have unlimited resources from a recruiting perspective, a talent team, etc., it's going to be slower, right?
Yep.
It's going to take more time. So it's like trying to figure out what strategy actually makes most sense for you. Just as a follow-up to that, do you have any recruiting hacks that you can help or share with us to, I guess, get through the remote hiring process, and also make sure that candidates have the skills that we aim for, that they have the right profiles, that they are culture adds, and that they are great communicators and strong from a technical skill perspective?
Yeah, so I think that question could be a 90-minute panel by itself, but right. I'll try to find a few tidbits that I think are relevant. So, first of all, in terms of hacks, I don't know if hack is the right word for it, but obviously having someone
know how to do it the easier way. Let's be honest. Just want all that information.
I would say that finding the right person to connect you with the people you want to chat is super important. Now, In a large country like the US, it could lead to access problems, right? If I don't have the right type of network, I'm not going to get the good offers, which is a problem. But in Israel, because it's a small market and everyone knows everyone, everyone could be connected to someone that is connected to the hiring company. That 6 degrees of separation thing doesn't work in the Israeli tech scene. It's probably more like 2 degrees of separation tops. So finding the right person to connect always helps. But even without that, Israelis are very skeptical and very cynical. And you need the right way to break the ice. So when you reach out to them, it can't be, the very traditional, we're company X, here's what we're doing, here's why you should care about us, let's chat thing. It needs to be personal, like ideally on the subject line, but at the very least in the first paragraph, you need to hook that person on something personal that shows that there's a reason you're reaching out to them rather than everyone else. So that's, I don't know if I can call it a hack, but that's something I would definitely pay attention to. And then on the cultural side and finding the right fit, I think the balance here is you have to differentiate between cultural differences between the countries and cultural differences between companies. And it's okay for a single company to encapsulate or to contain various cultures, right? So the way I think about culture is there's this amorphous polygon or something like that, and that is your culture. And with each person you're hiring, you're basically kind of pulling on the edges of that shape and extending it in some direction. And then you're hiring the next person and you're extending it slightly differently. So what you want to do is hire people who you think aren't necessarily within the center of your culture. I know this is very vague, but hopefully people get it. You want to hire people who are somewhat around the edges of your culture so they can extend it and then make it more localized and extend it to Israel. Now, the last thing I'd say about culture, it's really hard to build culture remotely for a company that isn't remote first. Yeah. So if you are expanding into a new geography, I would say if you can send someone who really embodies the culture of the company and send them for a few months or even weeks as you're starting your new location, that's super helpful. And one of the things, when I was at WeWork, I moved back to Israel a few months after we opened the Israeli Technology Center. And I was able to bring in a lot of the way that, the way things are done at WeWork. I was able to bring a lot of that with me as I came back to Israel. And I think that played a huge part in getting the Israeli location up to speed with the rest of the company.
I think those are great tips. And actually, this is perfect for Leah and the work that she does. I love the fact that you noted sending people who are great articulations of your culture over to decide if that is a match, if that particular country or, again, culture is the right match. So Leah, let's say we've decided to recruit a team in Israel. Can you walk us through the process, maybe a 30,000-foot view of like a high level user employee journey? What's the timeline of the process of actually getting, we're not talking about entities, but offices stood up from your standpoint?
Absolutely. Yes. So, congratulations. You've decided on Israel. That's really exciting. You're at the forefront of innovation and modern technology. So hats off to you there. But to the other panelists' points, you really need to work with a specialist recruiter in the country that understands not only the market expectations and what employees are going to expect, but also can provide insights to those industries. The second degree of separation, they know everyone they need to know in that industry and can get you a good talent pool. What we've learned through the talent shortage myth is it's not always about a lack of people. It's about getting competitive offers out quickly and making sure that you secure secure when someone's interested and really does buy into that dream or that value of the organization. So I would say working with a specialized recruiter to help you identify the candidates is a really critical piece. Once someone has identified who they want to hire, in most countries, globalization partners can onboard in as few as 5 business days. So what typically takes the longest amount of time is for the employee to review the employment contract, because we forget, right? Employment at will doesn't exist outside of the United States. So ensuring that the employment contract really mitigates risk on behalf of the employer, but also meets the expectations of the person on the ground is critical. So giving them time to review that, but really once they've decided that they're ready to sign on, we can help onboard, and it's a pretty quick process from there. With the employer of record approach, you're going to have immediate access to that new market. You can start looking at other countries you may want to develop in if it's been successful, but it's always interesting to look at speed to market, and that is super important. But the decision-making process on vendor selection with an employer of record shouldn't be rushed. It's incredibly important because you're choosing a business partner that's going to help represent your people, and your people is what actually makes the organizations and the projects move forward. You can throw money and resources at an initiative, but if you don't have that buy-in from the people, and if you're not working with a strategic partner that understands the expectations of those people, then really when challenges hit down the road, who's going to help you? Who's in your corner that's talking about, okay, this is what we should typically do in this situation, or maybe we should look at it from this angle. So I would say the timelines, once someone identifies who they want to hire, you can move really quickly, but what shouldn't be rushed is the evaluation process, because when you work with people, it's not cheap and it's not easy. You want to get it right the first time.
I love that. And just in case anybody missed that, they have a turnkey solution that 5 days, up and running in 5 days. So we've hit on this a little bit, but I'd love to kind of just dig a little bit. There's a number of cultural differences and nuances between particularly the United States, and Gilles hit on this as well, and Israel. So some of those things are communication style, developing internal advocates, leadership approaches, etc. So how do you determine if someone is like the right addition to your team, or even your overall culture? Do you have any questions or things that you ask in order to drill in and even determine if they would be a good fit? And also, just as an aside, what approaches have you seen work when you're trying to bridge those two cultures?
That's a great question. And HR people are masters in interviewing for culture, but they might have a few. If you're coming from the U.S., you might have a few U.S. biases that are going to make it hard for you to evaluate Israelis. The thing I think to remember the most about Israelis is that what from the outside might seem like a conflict could be a natural way of communication. So it's regular to see heated discussions, and you could assume, with American eyes, you can look at that and assume there's animosity there or some bad blood. But in actual, these are great friends. They have a heated discussion, and once they're done, and they cool off in a minute and go grab lunch together. And that's something that is sometimes really hard to grasp.
I'm not screaming. I'm just speaking loud.
Exactly. Exactly. But I don't think these are the cultural differences you actually have to be afraid of. I think these are things that with training to both sides, you can, bridge that gap easily. I think that the real cultural differences is how real conflicts are brought to surface. And the way that Israelis surface actual conflicts or actual problems in the organization, the way that Israelis surface them and the way that Americans surface them could be very different. So that's something that you really want to invest a lot in. And as for the individual, a question that is cliche but always works, I always ask them about past conflicts, past problems, things that have not worked well, and see how well they've done in those situations. My least favorite example is a person who told me about sort of a mutiny that happened, and the team he was taking on didn't really like him, and he didn't know how to handle that. And I told him, all right, pick one of those people and tell me how you managed to resolve that situation. And he picked a story that ended up in letting go of that person, and it might have been justified. It might have made sense. Maybe the other 99% all worked well, but just the fact that this was what he decided to focus on, for me, was a red flag. So, look for the red flags, ask the tough questions. It should work whether you're in Israel or anywhere else in the world, I think.
I love that. Okay. So I have one more question for Leah. I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. After that, I'm going to go ahead and open up the Q&A. It looks like we've got a couple of questions coming in. So Leah, I think that we all know there are cultural considerations that we have to be looking into when we're trying to decide where to place this or where to hire people. In terms of compensation and benefits considerations, like how does a business navigate those differences between locations? And how do they know that they're both compliant, but also competitive?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a challenging situation. So my heart goes out to anyone on the phone who's trying to tackle this right now, because it's not easy. It's basically trying to take a localized approach for every different region, for every different job, and every different seniority that's in that job, right? Because all of those factors go into that decision-making process. So I would say, making sure you're working with an expert, obviously, that understands. We've iterated that before, but that they really understand the local market. One mistake that I think US companies tend to make, and it's really, it's noble, it's coming from a good place, but they want to mirror the benefits and the compensation package that they offer here in the US. And it's coming from a good place, but in actuality, it could be a little insulting if you send someone an employment contract that's not in their local language, that doesn't take into consideration their currency, all of these things. So you don't want to set a bad impression. You want to learn as much as you can at that 10,000-foot view, and then work with an expert to say, this is what I know, this is what I don't know, this is our business initiative in this region, so that they can help you work through some of those things. The cost analysis is really important as well. So we had a situation with the customer who was negotiating a salary, for example, and they're saying, okay, 4,000 USD per month. That sounds great. Well, if the candidate's sitting in Mexico, they may be considering 13 months, or if they're sitting in Brazil, they may be considering 14 months. So suddenly you've overestimated what this employment relationship is going to cost you just by trying to negotiate outside of your understanding of what's culturally acceptable in that country. So little things like that can trip you up, which is why it's important to work with the experts. In terms of benefits, Globalization Partners is always going to cover everything that's statutorily required in country in terms of benefits, and then we'll help navigate customers if they're working in jurisdictions where it might be common to offer supplemental benefits depending on the role of the person or something like that. So working with a company like Compete to understand what the pay range is going to be before you make that offer to the candidate, and then working to make sure that your benefits are going to be in line with what those expectations are in region.
Okay, I got it. Education, I think, is everything, and understanding.
So true.
Again, I do think it's important to work with the experts. So thank you so much, Leah. I'm going to open up the floor for questions. I'm seeing some come in. I just want to end with one last question. I'm going to focus on for this one, but I do think that most of you actually already kind of touched on it a little bit, which is how important is it to hire employees, particularly in these hyper-technical roles that have spent time or an extensive amount of time developing their craft in the Israeli army?
So I would say that, army aside, you want to have people who have experienced being on an engineering team at a real company. And whether it's the army, whether it's anywhere else, it's just an important skill, or actually a collection of skills that people need. Now, it doesn't mean that each and every person on that team needs to have that, but you need to build some sort of a hierarchy, not a management hierarchy, but a mentorship hierarchy where, you have people who've been there, done that, seen everything you could possibly see. And then people who are mid-level, and then people who just need mentorship. And, each one of them eventually has a different, I call it net mentorship index, how much they're spending as a mentor versus how much they're acquiring as a mentor. So you want to build a well-balanced team. And what the Army units give you is people who are relatively young, yet already have a lot of experience. Right. So in a way, in many cases, you're trading a university degree for experience, because you get out of the Army, and instead of going to school, you can find a job right away. So that's one. The Army units also give you a lot of network, but as I said, Israel is a small country. You don't really have to worry about that too much, I think. At the risk of a shameless self-plug, I would say that there are other ways to gain experience. One of them being Wilco, where you can, start playing on Wilco and gain experience like you would at a real company, but at your own pace and in a very safe environment. So if you don't have that Army experience, if you didn't get to participate in maintaining a production system or working with peers and colleagues, then you can always come to our platform, just practice those things. I'm letting myself self-plug because it's free. So, I'm not promoting a paid product here. So, that's another way to gain experience. But as an employer, I would say just make sure the team is balanced. Make sure that you have people who take mentorship, make sure you have people who give mentorship, and make sure they get to work together so they can rub off each other and help each other out.
Got it. Okay. So let's go to the questions. Thank you so much, Gilles, for answering a bunch of them. Let me start with this one. So what happens when we want to, and I'm going to actually point this at Leah, what happens when we want to set up our own entity and employ the staff directly? Is there a buyout fee to get the employee? So I think what the question is if they start with a Globalization Partners, what does it look like to go and say, wait a minute here, we've got a team of 30 people. We should actually now's the time to actually build an entity in this country. So how does that actually work? Are you involved with that? What does that look like?
Oh, completely. Yep. So this is a unique situation, and it's really fun because it means our customers have been successful in region, right? They've got this team running and pumping. They're ready to set up their own infrastructure. We work directly with them. So basically, the employees would resign from Globalization Partners Israel, and the customer would hire them under their own entity once they've got, payroll function, benefits administration, everything set up themselves. So it's really a team mentality when this type of action, triggers and happens. And what we often find is customers say, okay, we were successful in Israel. Can we turn around and do it in Australia or Canada or Indonesia or another place to really continue to grow our business? So we absolutely work with our customers in this process and make sure that everything is transitioned, nicely and perfectly off into their entity from Globalization Partners.
Okay, got it. And then just as a follow-up, like what transparency in the hiring process do you have on the employer of record side? How much transparency do you have? How much transparency do the employees and leadership teams have into what that looks like, the hiring process, getting them all set up and onboarded?
Full transparency. Yep. The employee on the ground is, completely comfortable and confident with the model before we engage whatsoever. And the company themselves are making sure that this model can support, what they're trying to achieve in that region. So we want to be very transparent about how this relationship works. We are hiring the person in country. We are literally the employer of record in that country. But in their employment contract, we assign them to work 100% of the time for our customer. So it's not like they'll be working for any other customers. They're dedicated to them when they want to terminate or when they need to give a bonus or a salary increase. We work directly with them on that professional.
Right. That's awesome. And so I'm going to ask one more question. This is something that Gilles actually touched on already in the Q&A section, but I'm just curious, and I'd love to just get, I guess, both On and Gilles' take on this, which is, do like R&D professionals, do they still need computer science, computer engineering, whatever it may be, data science, etc. Degree? Is that like a major advantage when you're looking at candidates? Does that matter that much anymore? Just what are your feelings on that? On you.
Oh, you want to go for? Oh, okay, sure. Well, I'd say first of all, when we talk about university degrees, we have to remember that there is no software development or software engineering degree. There is no, or at least in most colleges, you won't find it. There is no product manager degree, right? So what we have is adjacent degrees that we think are related. We think that computer science is a path towards being employed as a software developer. Now, I myself am a computer science graduate. I think it's a great academic field. I enjoyed every minute of my degree, but I don't think that I necessarily had to do that to become employable as a software developer, or to even be a better software developer, depending on the type of work that you do. If you're leaning heavily on algorithms, then yes, maybe a computer science degree makes a lot of sense for you. But most developers don't actually get to practice a lot of algorithms on their day-to-day. So I would say university degree is great if you can afford it, if you can enjoy it, if you can make the most out of it. But I don't think it's a must.
And Gilles, you I noticed mentioned boot camps, which I love. Can you go ahead and just like expand on that just a little bit?
So it really depends what you need. I agree with On wholeheartedly. A computer science degree is great. It's not an absolute necessity. A case in point is the Army, right? The Unit 8200, for example, is a phenomenal ground for people that are battle scarred, tried, and particularly very well trained in understanding hierarchy, discipline. Discipline is key. If people don't have discipline, then you'll have a very hard time teaching them, even if they've never been to school. So what school teaches you, or boot camp teaches you, any of those outfits, is a sense of discipline, with a schedule of exams, of classes, of assignments. So that is, I believe, that is the number one skill that is required in order for somebody to be successful in a corporate environment. Because once they have the willingness and the attitude to learn, then everything is teachable. Now, there are some basics. I mean, English is important. I mean, obviously, particularly if you're a US-based company trying to recruit overseas talent. Number two, applied math I think is important. Basic understanding of math concepts. And then outside of that, you can hire somebody like On pointed very rightfully so earlier in one of your questions, is the fact that you have to hire an infrastructure. So that means hire somebody who has been a senior developer somewhere else first. Create that infrastructure and then build underneath. And you could use those boot camps in order to do that. So the boot camps are great only if you're dictating the curriculum in that boot camp. So if it's adapted to you, to your organization, and to the type of software that you want to develop. Because having a boot camp in Java when you need C# developers is not going to help. So you want a boot camp that is adapted to your curriculum. You could actually sign up with a boot camp and say, we're going to provide you with some elements of the curriculum. If you follow that curriculum, we'll hire the top 10 recruits in that boot camp. And you guarantee that at very top salaries. People want to place their students. So they'll go along with that. And we just partnered with at least half a dozen of those in Israel, and very successfully. We got over 50% of our staff through this means of recruiting.
Wow, that is phenomenal. That is I think that is something we are still working on in the States, is really giving boot camp grads kind of the shine and the opportunities that you're mentioning. That's fantastic. And then
I would say just one thing about boot camps, which is really important. I think boot camps are great, and I've made a lot of great hires over the years. But just like any other type of training, there's still different levels of people. And when you hire from a boot camp, you can't treat everyone finishing a boot camp as if they all got to the same level and learned the same things. It's not a replacement for your interview process to understand who is the top of that class and who you want to take on.
Got it. Okay. And then I guess the last piece would just be, if it's a person who's not really comfortable on the self-branding side, what would you recommend candidates do to stand out? And feel free, I'm going to open that up to any one of you, particularly
easily, I would say play on Wilco and have a good page where you can show what you've done and the type of work that you were able to accomplish. But other than that, contribute to open source. Self-branding is not just about being extroverted and calling your name out all the time. It's also about producing great work that is noticeable. And if you do that in front of enough people, you'll get noticed. So you can do that in open source, and the communication style in many cases is more textual than face-to-face, which works better for introverted people sometimes. So definitely do a lot of that. Maybe write, if that's something that you feel inclined to do. Write about the challenges that you're facing and how you're able to handle them, the things that you do when you encounter something new. And you know what? There are always going to be readers for content of that sort. And as we learn, we tend to think that once we've learned it, it's trivial. But just detailing the process of how we picked something new up is going to help a lot of people who are looking into picking that skill.
I love that. Okay. Anyone else want to add to that?
Well, I think honestly, in the last, 2+ years of us all working remotely, even if you aren't extroverted by any means, helping people understand what soft skills you've developed and what emotional IQ you've developed over the last 2 years of working remotely. People want to know that you can do the job and you can do the job well on your own. And that comes from the discipline, but also that you're going to be able to, instill that in others as well. Let's all work together, but let's all try to understand the boundaries and the challenges that we're working with outside of work too.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I think that's a great.
I just want to add one quick thing.
Gilles.
Yeah, on self promotion. Don't hesitate to dream, and don't hesitate to demonstrate your capacity to have passion. And that's not selling yourself. It's more selling the gut. What's inside, the fire in the belly,
Sure.
but with a lot of deference and humility, and which is a hard balance to have.
Yep.
So, but humility is key. I mean, we will not recruit somebody with ego.
Yep.
And so that's really important. And humility is not the self-deprecation. It's more like the aggrandizement of others.
Right.
Right. It's making others better. Can I contribute to the whole by making everybody around me better? That means you're the Michael Jordan of the team.
Yep. That's so great. I think you've hit the nail on the head with that one. Okay, so we are at 12:15. I wanted to go a little bit longer since we did have those technical issues in the beginning, but I think we're walking away with a ton of really, helpful information, from like the cultural nuance piece to recruiting strategies and hacks, to just what it looks like to actually, what are the mechanics of building a team, an R&D team in Israel. So I just want to just let everybody know that I appreciate everybody's comments, and there were some really fantastic questions as well. Obviously, I want to thank Leah and Gilles, as well as
thank you, Natalie.
Yes,
I really appreciate it. And And also the team at Compete, and they are fabulous, for inviting me to host this fantastic panel. I want everybody to have a great day and check out Compete, because they've got some really, really interesting things that they're building. And also it is so incredibly helpful when you're thinking about building a team in Israel. So thank you to everybody. Have a great day. And yeah, have a great day.
Have a good one. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you very much.